Okay?
Yeah, that's started now, Chairman.
Okay, so we're now live. So good to see everybody this morning. As you know, the meeting is going to be webcast on YouTube and it's available for everyone to look at later if you want to. I've got to start off by reading all the names of the committee to make sure you're here. So I've got to go through that again. So could you just indicate that you are here when I call the name? I'm here. Lance, are you here this morning?
Yeah, here, Chairman.
Yeah. Chris Carter?
Yes, Chairman, I'm here.
Mark Cooper?
Good morning, Chairman. Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, morning. Rod Cooper?
Yes, good morning again.
Yeah. Roland Dibbs, is he here?
No, he isn't, Chairman.
No. Okay. Jane Frankham, I know you're here.
Present.
Yeah. And Andrew, you're here.
Yeah.
Keith, you're here.
I'm in the same virtual here that you are.
Gary Hughes, you're here.
Yes. Good morning, Chairman.
Morning. Wayne, you've been here for a long time.
Yes, I've been here, Chairman. Thank you.
Alexis, I can see you're here.
Yeah.
Neville, you've been here. Neville, you've been here for a long time too.
I have.
Yeah. Stephen, you're here.
Good morning, Chairman.
And Rogers, you're here.
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
Right. Jan Warwick is not here this morning, and I gather Pal Hare is here substituting for her. Is that...
I am indeed, Chairman. I'm here.
Right. Caroline, you've got your hand up. Did you want to raise anything?
Only I could see somebody called Rowley was in the lobby waiting to come into the meeting.
Yes, thanks, Caroline. That's our deputation for item 7, and
Okay.
I understand he was just getting on to just to make sure that he had a connection. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
As we go through the meeting and in terms of decisions, Katie will carry out the voting procedure and we will leave it to when the vote is taken to decide how that vote is done. It may be done by a roll call vote individually, or it may not, depending upon how the meeting goes. So I've got to remind you all that can you keep your microphone muted unless you're called upon to speak, and to remind you that you may be visible on the screen to the public and to other members even when you're not speaking. And can you leave your cameras on at all times to make sure that everybody who may be watching this can see you. And can you also make sure that you attend the item for the whole time? If you do have occasion to leave it, then you should refrain from voting. So if we could go then straight into the agenda. Apologies for absence. We've got one apology, that's Jan Warwick, and Councillor Pal Hare, thank you Pal, is in attendance as deputy. Declarations of interest, we normally deal with this as the item comes up, and I'll leave you to decide whether you want to declare one at the appropriate time. So item number 3, minutes of the last meeting. Do any members have any comments on those meetings? And if there are none, can I assume they're all agreed? Good. So moving on then, swiftly, deputations. We've got a total of 4 deputations today, 2 on each item. There is one member who will be speaking on the first item. He has 10 minutes. All the other deputations have up to 10 minutes to speak if they wish to do so. In terms of questions, after the deputy has spoken, I will then ask members if they have any questions of that deputy as soon as that person has spoken, before we move on to the next deputy. That deals with deputations. Chairman's announcements, just a couple. Can you, well, again, I've been asked to remind everybody that it's a live meeting, and you are on camera at all times. Can I go on to, oh, that's basically that. Can I remind you all that there is going to be a training session at 2 o'clock on Monday, the 5th of October. I've circulated a possible agenda, and I know Councillor Mark Cooper has seen it. And there are some interesting items on that agenda, not least probably the white paper on planning, which is going to be a subject of some interest to us all, I'm sure. I believe there is this item will be coming up at Cabinet on the 28th of September, and there's a paper on it there. And so we will have full opportunities to discuss it at our meeting on the 5th of October, insofar as it relates, of course, to county councils. So that's, don't think I've got any other announcements to make, so I'll move on swiftly to...
Peter,
yeah.
Before you do move on, it's Roger Price. I have given my apologies for that particular meeting because it is Fire Authority Away Day. So I expect it will also apply to Chris as well.
Right, okay. Okay, noted. You'll miss a good meeting. Anyway, there we go. We'll move on to Forest Lodge Home Farm, item number 6 now. You'll remember this item was postponed from our last meeting in July because the officers wanted to define clearly the additional items which were to be utilised if planning permission was granted, and the original application did not cover it fully. So the application is for variation of condition 16 to allow additional mobile screening kit on site to improve operational efficiency at Forest Lodge Home Farm. And you'll be aware that there is a special condition within the conditions relating to a new noise assessment that must be carried out before this equipment is used. So that's the basis of the item, and I will ask Sam Dumbrell to lead and present the item. Sam.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just trying to upload the presentation now. Share it rather. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Right. I'll begin. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. As the chairman just mentioned, we're presenting item concerning the variation of condition 16 on planning permission 18-11586 to allow additional plant machinery at Forest Lodge Home Farm Quarry in Hythe. This slide just showing the location of the sites in southern Hampshire, south of the town of Hythe, very close to Southampton Water. Moving forward, this is not the most up-to-date aerial photo. It shows the site pre-extraction. The site's active sand and gravel quarry occupies about 5.5 hectares of land. Again, it lies a couple of kilometres south of town centre of Hythe. And members, if you look to the left west of the red line, you can see the large residential housing estate, which is separated from the site by the main road, sort of the north-south running main road. To the north and south of the site is undeveloped agricultural land, and to the west of the site's heavily planted boundary, and then part of the you can show some of the industrial estate which heads towards Southampton Water. This slide shows the site layout and the phasing. The extraction restoration is from west to east or left to right. Again, members can see the site access and the residential properties immediately west of the site. The site's currently finishing extracting in phase 1 and is looking to move into phase 2. Some photos that are coming up will show the site in better detail. Members who've been to the site will recall the site access point, purpose built for the development in 2017, with visibility displays and turning lanes. It's a view from the same site access looking north-northwest. Members will be able to see some of the residential properties on the left-hand side of the picture. They're approximately, the nearest property is approximately 35 metres away from the site itself. This picture shows the site interior along the western boundary. You see that is quite well developed since the last application in 2019. Members along the left-hand side of the slide see the sort of natural bund and the planted boundary with the Forley Road, which separates the site from the residential estate opposite. This is another photo from the site moving eastwards. Again, it shows the phase 1 pretty much complete. The red screener you can see in the background there. The northern boundary is still heavily planted. That's retained. No plans to remove that. Moving to the proposal itself. The proposal is to vary condition 16 to add in additional plant and machinery to help make site operations more efficient. The additional pieces of plant and machinery are highlighted in bold. So an additional 13-ton excavator, an additional dump truck for general site operations, and for cell engineering work, which will be needed once phase 1 is started to be filled and restored. An additional 25-ton dozer, another large excavator, and a 5.5-ton roller is required by the applicant to carry out these works. Again, this second slide talking about a proposal just to highlight what's currently permitted on site. 1 screener, 1 excavator, 1 loading shovel, 1 tractor and bowser, and then the bottom 2 paragraphs just show what I've already just described to you, additional kit. Moving to the comments we've received on the application. We haven't had a response from New Forest District Council planners, but the New Forest District Council Environmental Health Officer doesn't raise an objection, subject to conditions on noise assessment and proactive noise monitoring being updated and reimposed. County Councillor Wade has objected to the proposal, raising concerns over further plant machinery on the site will lead to greater adverse impacts on neighbours, primarily through noise and to air quality. Councillor Wade also raises concerns about the continued planning creep of the site in terms of additional plant machinery and general sort of industrialisation of it. No objections from any other consultees. Moving to comments from the public, a total of 5 representations received from local residents and local residents group, all objecting on the grounds of adverse dust, noise and HGV disturbances on the locality. One other issue that keeps on arising is how the retrospective nature of the application continues to happen, and also the lack of liaison meetings, which usually occur up to twice a year, their postponement or them being cancelled as being heavily criticised also. Moving to the key issues, dust impacts from the site. Local residents have raised concerns about continual dust and sand being blown onto the roads and onto nearby properties. The environmental health officer hasn't raised any objections to this, although he's aware of some complaints received. The site benefits from conditions controlling dust management, which again, if this application is recommended for approval, would be reimposed. The environmental health officer is satisfied that existing dust management conditions remain acceptable, and with those being reimposed, no adverse impacts on the locality are expected. Moving to the second key issue in terms of increased noise from the site, whilst the environmental health officer raised no objection to the proposal, subject to updated noise assessments and noise monitoring conditions being imposed. He was concerned that the assessment wasn't as full an assessment as he would have expected. In saying that, again, subject to the conditions being imposed as requested, they require proactive noise monitoring, not just when a complaint is received, all to be agreed, subject to advice from the environment health officer if this permission is approved. The environment health officer again raises no objection in terms of adverse impacts on noise from the site. And again, as mentioned previously, there's continual concerns over the retrospective nature of the application, particularly from local residents, in that the applicant is repeatedly brings in the plant machinery going against the current condition 16 without gaining approval from the planning authority, and the planning authority, in terms of visiting the site, with following complaints arising, has ended up with the generation of this application to regularise these breaches of planning condition. Moving to the recommendation. Recommendation is that planning permission be granted subject to the conditions set out in Appendix A of this report, and the agreement of all four signatories on the current Section 106 legal agreement, that they're all okay with the contents of it, and that can be reattached to the resolution. That Section 106 agreement requires the applicant to ensure that the site's restored in accordance with the restoration plan, and that a public right-of-way is created across the site, connecting rights-of-way to the east with the Forley Road on the site's western boundary. I'd just like to draw members' attentions to the update report that was circulated yesterday, which updates proposed condition 31, the noise monitoring, updated noise monitoring and noise management plan. It tightens the condition considerably and puts better defined timescales on when the planning authority would receive updated noise information from the applicant. And that concludes the presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sam. I'll bring in the deputies in a moment. Before I do, can I just ask you, Sam, with regard to the liaison panel, the report itself indicates that there was a meeting scheduled for earlier this month. Did it take place? And if not, does the council have any views on what should happen next?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, the meeting didn't take place. There was there was miscommunication between all parties. The onus is on the applicant, TJ Waste and Recycling to organise the meetings and notify all participants in advance of the date, time and location, and that didn't happen. In terms of keeping this liaison group alive, again, irrespective of the outcome of this application, the county planning team are going to look to organise the next meeting. This isn't something we do regularly, but in terms of keeping the meeting going and allowing dialogue between all interested parties, we're going to arrange the next meeting, hopefully for the next few weeks, for early October, just to get everyone around the table and just keep people talking.
Thank you for that. I'll now go on to the deputies on this particular item. The first one is Peter Armstrong, who I believe is here, and he's chairman of the local residents association. Peter, you have up to 10 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, councillors. As mentioned, I'm here today as chairman of the local residents association for the estate, which is directly across from the quarry. You may remember it coming to the last meeting where it did go into a 2-hour discussion for those of you who are here. I'm also advisor for the waterside on the New Forest Business Partnership and a previous parish district councillor. And I was vice chair of the district planning committee. So I'm well aware, and I spent 20 years in local government, being an award-winning manager of a service. For those who were on the committee last time, I want to say thank you on behalf of the residents of Netley View Estate for not allowing the behemoth of a screener to stay on site and using your powers to only allow a smaller machine. Also, I'd like to appreciate those who stood and voted against the officer's recommendation last time because of the way this company has acted. For those new to the committee and those who are deputising today, I'd like to share some thoughts with you and quickly run through a little bit of history, which I trust will help you with your decision today. Before the site was opened, the company promised at public exhibition that there would be no screening on site. As we know, that has changed. Part of the original permission entailed regular liaison with local residents. At the last regulatory committee meeting, it was clearly stated about the company's appalling communication with local representatives and residents. I regret to say this has got even worse. Even though requests have been made through the Hampshire Liaison Monitoring Officer for a meeting again and again, this has not happened. The company have not liaised at all with local people. This application is not as straightforward as your report gives you today, and I will do my best to explain the reasons for saying this and how this committee, again, is being used to legitimise what has come across as we do what we like behaviour on behalf of this company. As the regulatory committee, you have the power to set standards and decide what is allowed and what isn't. TJ Haulage does not seem to understand this or abide by what has been agreed. Last time they brought equipment on site with no permission, were then reported, given a 28-day permission under powers which seemed to be extended, and rather than enforcement was legitimised partly at the last regulatory committee. With this application, this company have done it again, as has been mentioned by your officer, reported by residents again, which brought a visit from an officer to find equipment on site not been allowed. The officer's report states that TJ Haulage was not hiding the equipment. However, this is virtually impossible on a site such as this. That is not possible to hide equipment of the size that they brought on site. There have been many other breaches by this company on this site. They've been piling extracted material in heaps longer and higher than permitted, and that's been reported to Hampshire. The officer visited to address this, and I understand this has happened on more than one occasion. Lorries leaving without sheeting from the site. I witnessed only on Monday this week a lorry leaving the site at 2:30 p.m. with no sheeting over it, with sand piled on the lorry. Another complaint to add to the growing list which have been given to Hampshire County Council. We've not been giving it to the company because we've lost trust with them, as they're not showing any integrity on site by doing what they're meant to do. We've had lorries parking up near the shop across the road, again not allowed. The latest was just a few weeks ago. Lorries not being cleaned, having loose gravel on the rear before leaving the site. I personally had an unfortunate instance a few months ago when I ended up behind a TJ lorry. Gravel fell off the rear end, hitting my car. I thought it was okay until a couple of days later I checked, as I had a crack running down the windscreen. Cost of £75, with the excess from my insurance. The biggest issue is actually this one. We had a strong easterly wind a while back, and virtually all the estate was covered with dust. That's 560 homes. Clouds of sand and dust were blown from the site and were documented, and photos are sent to Hampshire County Council, more than just a fine deposit over virtually all of the estate. Total disregard for local residents and their health. This issue was highlighted when the original permission was given. No damping down was known to be done on the heaps, as should have happened under the regulations. We now understand that the mist atomizer system had broken last autumn. This had not been fixed or replaced. Only when residents complained were moves made to fix or replace this equipment. I've yet to have this confirmed. Only yesterday, I was talking to a neighbour, and the sound of the equipment now on site being used broke into our conversation. This is over 200 metres away. The noise level has gone up considerably with this unauthorised equipment on site. I'm unaware that the noise management plan has yet to be fully implemented. In spite of this, you are now being asked to approve more equipment when the company hasn't abided by the regulations already in place. To me, it makes a bit of a mockery of a planning committee. If it is approved, it looks to the public as rubber stamping poor business practice. I'm sure you're all aware of the 7 principles of public life, known as the Nolan principles, which any public officer or any of those who are elected seek to abide by. Just to remind you of some of the words which are within this document: act solely in the terms of public interest, accountable to the public, willing to challenge poor behaviour wherever it occurs. In this application, you have a firm who have exhibited poor behaviour on a number of matters. They've not even sent a representative again to this committee so that you can question them about these things. So in conclusion, I'm asking you to vote with the public interest in mind on this matter and suggest a deferral so all matters that are still outstanding can actually be resolved first. Ensure all things are done correctly for a few months, which this company seems unable to be able to do. An equipment that is currently not authorised to be removed from site or enforcement to take place. For TJ Haulage to liaise with local residents as a priority. Perhaps they might think of paying for a car wash for everyone after the dust that appeared all over, and apologise for their behaviour. Then TJ Haulage can come back to the committee having acted honourably and with a realisation they can't do just what they like. Asking maybe for the CEO of the company to come and answer questions and say what they've done to address their inconsistencies would be entirely reasonable for this committee. With all we are going through at this time, we need to build foundations in our country of integrity, honesty, openness, accountability, especially with businesses we work with. This do what we like mentality will not be good for the future of us as a society. Other businesses and applicants will then realise they cannot abuse or use this committee for their own ends. I would urge you as a committee to make a stand today, show leadership and not legitimise poor behaviour. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Mr. Armstrong, thank you for your deputation. I will now ask members if you have any questions of Mr. Armstrong. It was pretty clear what he said. If you do have questions, could you first make clear what your question is and who you are? Any questions? Councillor Carter.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, thank you for your presentation there. It does concern me that this is a retrospective application. I wonder if you're able to tell me the additional equipment that this application relates to has already been coming on site. Are you able to tell me when that was first noticed, when you first saw that equipment on site and I understand being used, irrespective of the fact that it had no permission?
Thank you, Councillor Carter. I wasn't the one who reported it. It was a little while ago, quite a few months ago, I believe, that this came on, but I cannot categorically tell you. But I think just the case that they've moved it on site without permission is an appalling behaviour again. And the noise has increased considerably since it has been on site.
The answer is he doesn't know, Councillor Carter. Councillor Quantrill.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Armstrong, would you like to comment on the proposal of Mr. Dumbrell that Hampshire County Council convene the next liaison panel meeting?
I think that would be an excellent idea because the company seem unable to do something themselves or don't want to. So I am very much in favour of that because then we can have an open discussion and start to try and build a relationship with this company who have basically not done anything on this line of things for a while.
Thank you for that. Councillor McAvoy.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Armstrong, could you just confirm again about the previous question about the liaison panel? As you know, I'm on the liaison panel as well, and I'm not actually aware of having any notifications to meet again since we met. I think it was back in October 2019. It might have been, yes, I think it was about October 2019. Have you actually had any communications at all with regards to a liaison panel?
There has been no communication at all from the company in any form whatsoever.
Okay, so it's not just me who has missed the communication.
No.
Right. Do we have any other questions from members of this deputy? In which case, Mr. Armstrong, you play no further part in this discussion. And I will ask the next deputy, in fact, sorry, Councillor Malcolm Wade now to address the committee as a deputy.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman and members, and
morning.
Thank you for letting me address your committee. And I apologise in advance if some of the things I say may already been said by Mr. Armstrong, but I won't be going to some of the more emotive areas, if I may. I wonder if any of you have ever lived next to a quarry, in which case you would have first-hand experience of some of the issues that are going to raise, some of the issues that my residents face daily. Regarding the report, you would be forgiven for thinking, what's all the fuss about and why have I come along today? Well, some of the residents in my division, as Sam Dunbar said, live 35 metres from the quarry. That is exceptionally close. In fact, they live opposite the entrance. So not only do they get the noise of the operation itself, but the vehicular comings and goings as well. And HGVs are not the quietest vehicles on the road. The point is, the modelled noise projections seem somewhat innocuous. However, when you sit in your garden, as many local people have during the lockdown in the summer months and those on furlough, the continuous noise of plant moving to and fro on the site, even when the troughs of noise level, let alone the peaks ongoing, are an audible irritation and nuisance to nearby residents. During the current COVID-19 crisis, we have not done the level of monitoring to ensure the noise levels in the model are adhered to. And when we do not advise the quarry operator that we coming along so they can ensure their operation does not break the noise levels at that moment. I'd like to draw members' attention to a bit of history. T&J Transport must have had a business plan when they took on this site, which would include profit margin and a resource plan. But on the 20th of September 2019, when they came along with a variation requiring a screener, because they required it to get the level of product out of the soil they were working with, why, I wonder, did their initial surveys not show they would require this equipment in the beginning? One could be forgiven for thinking the initial application was designed to be as innocuous as possible, and planning creep could be utilised to bring whatever equipment they needed. But that is clearly not the case. As you read in point 68 in the report, there was no attempt to conceal the extra activity, as has been mentioned, when it was discovered last year. But then again, they'd only just got permission for the screener, so why did not ask for more at that time? It would be too much to this committee or the local opposition to increase that amount of increase would bring. What one cannot help wondering if the monitoring officer had not seen the extra activity, would we be discussing it here today? After all, it's so easy to just drive in the equipment through the gate and the extra noise will be lost in the orchestra of sound the quarry produces. Currently, the site has permission for one screener, one excavator, one loaded shovel, one tractor and browser. The application seeks the following: one 25-ton excavator, one 13-ton excavator, one dump truck, one screener, one loading shovel, one tractor and browser. The cell engineering work requires a 25-ton dozer, 26-ton excavator and a 5.5-ton roller. Now, compared to some sites, the deposits at Forest Lodge Farm are relatively smaller, which is why the initial plant requirements probably seemed enough. But now we are moving from 4 items of plant to 9 items of plant. But of course, the application proposes there won't be an increase in noise levels. Really, are we going to believe that 125% increase in plant will have no significant increase in noise? I find that a concept hard to take on board, members. Now, this council has rightly declared a climate emergency, wanting to reduce the carbon footprint in an effort to reduce the devastating effects of climate change, which is seen with flooding in this country and fires abroad. To do this carbon reduction, we must be a driver where possible in all decisions. As the plant will no doubt be fossil fuel powered, we will be increasing the carbon footprint of this site by 125%. When all the plant is working, or a lesser figure if the operations are staggered, but it will be an increase and therefore gains the spirit and the reality of carbon reduction. Now, in the British summer, when it rains less, and it has been quite a good summer this year, the excavation and other plant, the production of dust and where it will go will be the prevailing winds. But unfortunately, if you live 35 metres from the site, it will reach your property. You cannot run a plant in a quarry without creating dust when it is nice and sunny, when local people want to sit in their gardens or put their washing out to dry. I wonder how T&J Transport thought they would operate this site from the beginning with only 4 pieces of kit they had in the initial application. Perhaps they did, or perhaps they always planned to add more in a phased way over the initial life of the site, thinking it was better than go in at the beginning with everything they might need. It might be designed to increase capacity, but then again, there are no extra HGV movements. Perhaps it is to improve the bottom line in sand and gravel extraction. Now, members, I'd like to draw your attention to the new noise assessment, which hopefully many of you have read. 55 decibels is the limit. Okay, now the noise assessment is based on assumptions, not controls. Now, an assumption that we're going to operate this way should be we are going to operate this way. That is the control. Because without controls, really, they can do what they want, for so long as they don't overdo the assessments. Now, Beach Crescent 1, 2 and 3 are 51 decibels, 45 decibels and 48 decibels. And Maple Road is 42. They're the nearest bits of the state to the site. Now, all the plants, when working at maximum operation, each level of plant ranges from 98 to 106 decibels, double the amount that we should be putting our residents through. Now, how are they dealing with it? Well, some of the interesting points, it's wind direction, of course, which will affect noise, and there's a reflection factor of 0.2. And of course, you want to look at the mitigation all around that. They're asking their drivers to drive carefully on site. They're asking their staff to avoid reversing. When you have moving plants in a quarry, how can you avoid having to reverse the vehicle? Really? You know, the noise assessment I find particularly weak. It hasn't got controls in it, and it doesn't deliver the protection that the residents who live in my division deserve. Members, we have a duty to councillors, and I don't need to tell you this because you all know, to improve the quality of life for the people of Hampshire, not to make it worse. So the residents of Netley View and the closer sections of the rest of Busash, I would request that you object to this and ask T&J Transport to come back with another plan which will not be so detrimental to local people's enjoyments of their property. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, do you have any questions that you want to put to Councillor Wade? I don't see anyone putting their hand up. So, members, do you have any questions that you wish to put to Sam Dumbrell, the officer who presented this item, before we go into debate? Councillor Quantrill.
Thank you. Mr. Dumbrell, both Councillor Wade and Mr. Armstrong have raised the point about retrospective or permission being granted retrospectively. Just remind me if that's a material planning point for us today.
It's what they have done is the development they have placed on site is unauthorised because it's not permitted by that condition. Retrospective applications are quite commonplace, not just for county councils, for district councils, unitaries. So the retrospective nature of this application is relevant, but it shouldn't be an overriding factor in the committee's decision.
Thank you.
Answer your question.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Next one with hand raised is Councillor Gibson.
Yeah. Hi. I was just going to ask Sam. There's been an allegation that the company is poorly behaved and basically don't really take the restrictions seriously. Is that his experience of working with them? Are they difficult to work with? Do they regularly flout the regulations?
Councillor, from our monitor officer, who's not here today, has a good relationship with the site manager himself, who, when we do receive complaints of whether it's about dust or noise, and mainly this year it's been about dust, but he has a good relationship with the site manager, who's keen within what he can do, working for the operator. He tries to do what he can when he can, as soon as it's arranged. In saying that, I think the operator in not attending liaison meetings, in not being proactive with residents, and again, it's not a material planning matter, but you know, they're not helping themselves, and they're certainly not helping their relationship with the local residents and in trying to overcome problems arising.
that answer the question?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. The next one is Councillor Mark Cooper.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Mr. Dumbrell, I'm a little bit worried about the sort of strength of the revision to the conditions on your paragraph 31 about the location of sensitive noise receptors, etc. Now, one of the key points made by the deputations was that the noise levels are already significant, and that what we're giving permission to today is the same situation. And I just wonder whether we as a committee are able to refuse the application on the basis that the actual noise solutions we deem to be inadequate. Now, is that a legitimate way forward or not?
Thank you, Councillor. What we've got to be mindful of today is obviously the sort of the history of the site. What we've got to focus on today is the condition they're applying to vary this new plant, which again obviously has a potential to increase noise and dust disturbances already being experienced. What I would like to do is draw members' attentions to conditions, the noise conditions 28 and 29 and 30, which precede the 31, which is looking to be varied, looking to be updated. Some of the deputies have already mentioned noise levels being experienced at local properties. Now, if all members can see condition 28, that has a maximum noise level at boundaries of the nearest noise sensitive properties, which were assessed and approved with the original permission, the 2016 permission, and that was again accepted by the Environmental Health Officer. Now, I think from when Councillor Wade was speaking, or sorry, it could have been Mr. Armstrong, they mentioned certain noise levels experienced at some of the nearest properties, and I believe that they didn't exceed that. I could be wrong. Moving down to condition 29, that this is an industry standard condition. It's been in place for decades, that you can, with noisier activities, you can have slightly higher noise levels emitted by the site and at the boundaries of noise sensitive premises for a very short period, 8 weeks in a calendar year. Now, again, these conditions are still acceptable to the Environmental Health Officer at New Forest. What I would add, moving to the condition 31, which is proposed to be updated, the condition requires submission, submission of this updated plan and assessment to be approved by the County Planning Authority, and we would only be able to approve that in conjunction with the Environmental Health Officer at New Forest District Council, particularly with regard to noise sensitive properties or premises. Now, what I would propose, what I would envisage doing if this application is approved today, would be as soon as the applicant submits his scheme, because they can't use this new equipment to infill phase 1, which is what some of the equipment, particularly the roller and some of the larger dozers required for. They can't use that until they've got this scheme approved by us and in conjunction with the Environmental Health Officer. So if you start looking at prior to commencement infilling of phase 1, or within 6 months of the granting of this permission, whichever is earliest. So again, they wouldn't be able to start using this equipment until that's approved. Now, I imagine some of you are probably saying, well, they've already got this equipment on site and they've done this before. Now, I think if they did do this, that would be a clear breach of that condition, and we would be able to take enforcement action immediately. Chris or David might be able to add something to this, but they would be clearly breaching that condition, and we would be able to take action to stop that equipment being used immediately. Again, we would probably go to the Environmental Health Officer for advice as well, particularly if complaints were being received. So I suppose, to cut a long story short, there are we feel, in conjunction with the Environmental Health Centre, there are enough existing conditions and this proposed amended one to control both existing operations on site and the additional plant being added. And I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything on that.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for what I think is a clear explanation. I don't know whether you think that's clear, Mark, but to me, Sam's saying that this new equipment cannot be used on phase 2 until a noise assessment has been submitted and approved by HCC and the Environmental Health Officer of New Forest. And if they did subsequently use the equipment, it would be a breach of condition on which we could take action. That's what I think in essence he said.
Chairman, thank you. The only question I have outstanding is a supplementary to that, and that is that does the county have the resource to respond so quickly if they are actually in breach of the conditions we lay down today?
I'm not sure anyone can answer that one.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Murray can.
Yeah, that might be a point for me to make a comment. I think everything Sam has said is absolutely correct. And just to very quickly recap, the retrospective nature of the application and the lack of communication from the operator, as Sam has explained, really in themselves are not material reasons to refuse this planning application. The key question is, will this extra equipment cause any harm to the amenities, any additional harm to the amenities of local residents? So I think in a circumstance where the local environmental health officer isn't objecting, the key issue here is the one I think that we discussed last time, which is about effective enforcement of the conditions that we put in place. And there's no doubt that during lockdown, as you all be aware, and as Councillor Wade suggested as well, not been as active as we might otherwise be in terms of proactively monitoring activity on sites like this. We are now getting back to normal business in that sense, in terms of visiting sites. There still is a resource issue. You're absolutely right, Councillor Cooper. But the onus will be on us to enforce any conditions and to make sure that we are proactively carrying out that role alongside the Environmental Health Officer at New Forest. So I think the issue here, and I see the frustration from local residents, and I understand it fully. I think it's less about ability to refuse this application and more about our ability to make sure that we enforce these conditions thoroughly going forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. I've got 3 other people who've raised their hands. The next one is Councillor Philpott.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It is obviously clearly on a similar line to the questions already. However, I just want to clarify something, if I could. The 2 deputies, Mr. Armstrong and our colleague Councillor Wade, made a good deal of their concern about the willingness of the company not only to cooperate with local residents, and Councillor McAvoy also mentioned the same thing when she spoke, but also the issue relating to breaches of existing conditions. Now, Mr. Armstrong, in his deputation, said a number of things, but he said he urged the committee not to legitimise poor behaviour. And this appears to be at the crux of the complaints, as far as I can tell, Chairman, from listening to the deputies. And we haven't got the opportunity just to question TJ Haulage and find out what their side of the argument is. But some of us have visited the site, and so we're aware of what we're looking at. What concerns me, and perhaps this is not so much a question then for Mr. Drumble as it is for Mrs. Stickland, because it's a question of whether or not this council can, say, for example, use policy 10 to refuse this application for additional equipment, on the basis that, as the residents say, it appears to be to them a reward for poor behaviour. So they can more or less, as the words that have been used, is that these people can do what they want and do what they want. They do it with impunity. They gamble that the county council are not going to do anything about it, are not going to enforce the existing conditions. So therefore, they appear, from the residents' perspective anyway, residents' association perspective, to be saying we'll do even more and we'll take even more because we're just going to test the county for not doing it. So legally, are we allowed to refuse it on that basis? That's the question. Sorry, Chairman. Thank you.
The question, I think, is simple, which you want to put to Caroline Stickland. Can bad behaviour be a reason for refusing this application? Caroline.
Hello, good morning.
Morning.
It's a good question. I think I don't know the answer to that one per se, without having a quick check-up on that. Perhaps one of our planning colleagues may know the answer off the top of their head. You know, you are looking at this application. It should be treated in the usual way, and whether that is a reason for refusal, that I can't answer at this point in time. I would need to review my notes on that one and planning law.
Okay, so I don't know whether Sam or Chris, you want to come in on that as to whether that's a justifiable legal reason for refusing.
Chairman, I think in itself, I don't think it is. We do have text within our minerals and waste plan that refers to the past performance of an operator being a consideration. So we obviously look to take it into account when weighing up all the various factors. I would say that it would be very difficult to use that as a sole reason for trying to withhold permission. And you know, I'm struggling to think how one could word a reason for refusal that would be justified on that basis alone, bearing in mind that we're here to consider, you know, the impacts that the development will have, not the behaviour of the applicant. And that's that's a principle that runs through all planning. So if it was to be, you know, if members were concerned about the proposal, it would have to be on the basis of harm of some sort, i.e. noise, dust, etc., as being the primary concern, rather than the past record of the operator.
Thank you for that. I've got two other councillors who wish to speak. Councillor McAvoy, your question to the officers. You're muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Just as an aside, to give you an indication of behaviours when we get pushed to the wire before a decision is made, 4 minutes ago, Councillor Wade and I received an email to attend a liaison meeting. I just thought I'd mention that. It's just popped up, and that is really symptomatic of the way things have been going. The question I wanted to ask the officer, I thought I recalled him saying that there was not a full assessment hadn't been done of noise monitoring and dust monitoring. I'd like to know why, how much was missing from the assessment, and had the assessment been full, would it have affected the recommendation in this proposal? Thank you.
Yeah, when I was describing the environmental health officer's comments, what he said was that the updated noise assessment has considered normal use of the quarry in terms of noise contributions from plant and equipment, excuse me, in accordance with condition 2028, which we looked at earlier, in the maximum boundaries, maximum noise levels at boundary of the nearest properties. What the environmental health officer wasn't as satisfied with was the assessment of the significant noise contributions from the new equipment, which would be used temporarily in terms of the cell engineering works, the cell roller and some of the larger dozers and excavators, some of which are on site, some of which are already on site, some of which they're proposing to be allowed to have on site. But at the same time, the Environment Health Officer was satisfied that the updated noise management plan and assessment, which is condition 31 as proposed to be updated and amended, he was satisfied that the impacts of the new equipment and the existing equipment being used in isolation and cumulatively could be controlled satisfactorily through that scheme, subject to it being submitted, and consulted upon, approved, and then approved formally.
If I could just come back, Chairman, I have to confess to being a little confused by that answer, because I believe you just said that the assessment was missing out the impact of the new equipment. Well, it is the new equipment that we are deciding on. So am I confused or not?
No, you're not confused, Councillor. If I can read you, verbatim from the Environmental Health Officer's response. It starts off, and again, this has been publicly available on the website. It starts off. Bear with me. It says, having reviewed the updated noise assessment and noise management plan, we would make the following comments. The updated noise assessment has considered noise contribution of plant and equipment from the normal use of the quarry and confirms compliance with condition 28, which is the 55 decibel total noise operations condition already imposed. Then they say, however, significant noise contributions from equipment used on a temporary basis, e.g. for cell engineering, and then he cites the specific pieces of equipment which the operator has brought into site without approval, have not been considered and ought to be to ensure compliance with the above condition during all site operations. And then he adds, the updated noise management plan is currently reliant on reactive noise monitoring in response to complaints to determine compliance with condition 28 outlined above. Consequently, it is recommended that provision be made for proactive measurements to be taken at least annually in accordance with the noise monitoring scheme proposed, especially given there is history of complaint regarding noise from the quarry. Now, the condition 31 that's proposed to be approved today has been agreed with that Environmental Health Officer. So going back to, firstly, I hope that answers the question, your question, Councillor McAvoy, a bit more clearly.
Well, if I can just add, I think perhaps I'm not very bright today, but I think I heard you say that the noise problem is dependent on the complaints. So what it says is that the noise can go ahead until somebody complains. Did I hear that right?
You did. The Environmental Health Officer did make a comment, and so you're correct in that historically, the existing noise management plan as approved tends to look at being reliant on reactive noise complaints, reactive noise issues to determine compliance with the other noise conditions on the permission. With the condition 31 that's proposed, they're saying that this would take a proactive approach. It would require at least annual noise monitoring, regardless of complaints at the nearest sensitive properties, and would include controls that complement the existing noise-related conditions to ensure those noise levels, the 55 decibels and the 70 decibels, aren't breached at those nearest properties. And again, if they were breached, then they contain mitigation that the applicant, in conjunction with the County Planning Authority and Environmental Health, would have to work with to ensure that didn't happen again, or why it happened and how to resolve it. And that could take the form of enforcement action from both us planners and from Environmental Health, through their own legislation. So I hope that explains it for you, Councillor. So you're not hearing things. You are correct in what you were saying.
Right.
That's reassuring.
If we could move on I've now got Councillor Price wishes to address or raise a question of Sam or the officers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, all that I've heard this morning indicates to me that the company does what it wants to do when it wants to do it and doesn't abide by what the conditions of any planning application say. And on that basis, so if they do move plant into the site without the permission, do we actually, as a county authority, have the authority to go in there and shut the site down until they comply with whatever the planning approval is, rather than just saying remove the plant? Because if you just say remove the plant, then that's an easy, they just get on with work that they're doing. That doesn't really penalise them very much at all. But if you could shut them down for a week until they actually complied, then that would be much more a control upon them, which they might take note of.
I'll put that question to Caroline. I suspect the answer is no, we can't do that, but I'll get her as legal advisor to confirm one way or the other. They already have an existing planning consent to do what they are doing at the present time. This is a new application. Caroline.
Hello, can you just repeat that question again for me, please? It would be really helpful just to run that by me again.
The question is that if they take plant onto the site, which they don't have permission for, rather than just asking them to remove the plant, can we not just, does the county have the power to shut the site down because they're acting illegally?
I don't think they have the power to shut the site down because they're acting. I think they're in breach of a condition. So I think an enforcement notice would be relevant. I can see Chris has got his hand up. An enforcement notice certainly could be served on them for that breach of condition. I'm not sure that they could effectively shut the site down for that. Chris?
Yeah, that's correct. I think, and I can see, Councillor Price, I can see the attraction in such an option. I'm afraid, as long as they revert to carrying out the activities for which they do have planning permission and use only the equipment for which they have planning permission, then they will be able to continue. So you can only effectively stop the elements that don't have permission. So yeah, you don't have the option of shutting the site down.
So that's the answer to that one, Councillor Price. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chairman. Questions, if I may. I note that the number of vehicles will increase from 4 to 9, but I don't see anything in terms of the increase in the number of manpower operating at the site. So is there, because of the number of parking spaces there, my assumption is that not all the pieces of equipment will be used at the same time. It'd be great if we could have some clarification on that. The other question, I don't read anything in the report that says why they need all this new equipment on site. Was it foreseen, and if so, why was it not introduced earlier? And my final question is, how many complaints have there been about this particular site? Thank you.
Sam.
Yeah, in terms of the first question about bodies on site, no, there's no plans for having increased staff on site. And in fact, some of the equipment that they're looking to get permission for today would only be used on a temporary basis. So yeah, so the equipment wouldn't all be used at the same time, and existing employees on site would be, I would imagine, all be trained, to use all of the equipment at any one time as required. Your second question, I think, was why are they seeking more equipment, for a second time? That's correct, isn't it?
Why
yes,
that's the
correct question. Yes, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. No, with the initial permission, they offered up. I think they offered up, 2 or 3 items of plant and machinery, which they believed was sufficient to carry out their operations. With the 2018 permission, which members will recall was to bring a screener onto site to screen the clay out of the sand, which was causing them problems in terms of selling the sand. That was an unforeseen, operational issue. So they applied again retrospectively to bring that screener onto site. And again, with this application now, with these additional sort of heavy pieces of kit, the roller would be used temporarily, weekly, not more than a month, to help with lining the side of the pit, lining the clay, helping to smooth out the clay liner before they start restoring it. The other equipment is used. It would be used in association with that as well. Now, whether they deliberately overlook, deliberately bringing this equipment in, sort of, every year, every couple of years, I can't answer that. Whether they completely overlooked the amount of equipment they needed back in 2016, that could be possible as well. I think with a site like this one, because it's so close to properties and obviously visible to properties, ordinarily sites like these, landfill sites, quarries, they don't ordinarily have this type of condition where you're conditioning so many individual pieces of kit. I think because of the obviously the proximity to the residential area, that these conditions were proposed and accepted by environmental health officers and then imposed. So yeah, whether it's an accidental, they've been overlooked by TJs or this will keep happening, I can't comment. So it probably doesn't answer your question satisfactorily, but that's, I think, the only answer we've got at this time.
Gary, and the final question was, how many complaints?
Sorry, Councillor Hughes, I'll just check it now. This year, we have had 10 complaints from local residents. The majority of those concerning dust complaints. The majority about dust, air quality complaints, and again, as Mr. Armstrong mentioned earlier, about HGV parking on residential streets, and then noises from operational noise from the site.
Right.
Chairman, if I may,
yeah, Chris. Yeah.
Add to what Sam said about the equipment. Is absolutely correct. We're not really sure why the applicant hadn't anticipated the need for a broader range of equipment on day one. I mean, the reality with this site is that the extraction and the commencement of the restoration are going to happen in a sort of rolling program. So they need equipment to extract, but they also need equipment to prepare the extracted phase one for restoration and infilling. So one might sensibly say, well, that should have been thought about on day one when they agree to a very narrow range of equipment. But the reality is to keep an efficient extraction and restoration, and to keep that moving forward at a good pace, they are now seeking this additional equipment. And that, I think that's where we're at, and that's about as much as we know, Chairman.
Thank you. I think we've all had a good go on questions on this particular item, and I'm now going to throw it open to.
Chairman, my hand's
up. Sorry.
My hand's up, Chairman. Councillor House.
Oh, sorry, Councillor House. Sorry, missed you.
So I've got a couple of questions to ask. Firstly, we've heard a lot about the original application and the history of the site. We're now being told the applicant needed these 9 items of equipment rather than 4. Were we wrong to limit the equipment first time round?
Chairman, with hindsight, perhaps so, Councillor. It did seem a very narrow range of equipment.
So if we've been presented with this original what's in front of us now, back when the original application came in, would this is clearly a rhetorical question, I can't really expect an answer, would we have permitted it?
Well, that's a very good question, and it all again boils down to, well, what would the impact be in terms of noise? So we would be back with the environmental health officer saying, can this range of equipment operate, satisfactorily without causing a problem? Yeah.
Because my suspicion, having been through this process with this application from before day one, when it was originally an allocation in the Minerals and Waste Local Plan, and council at the time were concerned about whether it should be allocated at all, because of the proximity of Netley View and other reasons, was that if we'd had this application back then, we probably wouldn't have accepted it, because we'd have considered the impact on residential amenity would have been too great. But that's a rhetorical, so I don't expect an answer to that. My second question, Chairman, is given that we are clearly dealing with a bunch of charlatans here, who operate outside planning control as a matter of routine, and we clearly haven't had the ability as a local authority to properly regulate them, why should we trust them now?
Well, that's probably a rhetorical question again.
Oh, no, it wasn't, Chairman. It wasn't, Chairman.
It wasn't
a
okay.
rhetorical question.
So you're probably asking Chris whether or not we can trust them.
Yes.
Well, I think, and I think as it was mentioned earlier, it's a shame that the applicant isn't here today for you to be able to question them about some of these issues, because I think that would have been quite helpful. I think it's a question of whether we trust our ability to enforce whatever conditions we apply ultimately. And clearly, over this summer, we've had some difficulty doing that. We had, a very nice summer. We also had, for a period of a week or so, a very windy period, which clearly hasn't helped when it comes to the dust issue. So I would like to think that going forward, we'll be in a better position to enforce. I'm trying to think of what other messages we can send the applicant as a committee, if you were minded to grant permission. We could send a strong message, informative or something of that nature, to express some of the concerns that members have been raising today. And clearly, the liaison panel is critically important to getting this process moving. And as Sam said right at the outset, we've, as officers, have decided that we will step in and instigate the meeting, although it's interesting to see that we've now had a communication from the applicant literally during this meeting on the subject. But we will move that forward and get that in place, and get it in place on more than an annual basis. It needs to be a regular meeting where the local community can see the whites of the eyes of the applicant and put these concerns to them directly on a regular basis if the issues continue.
Happy with that, Keith?
Well, actually, what I'm going to get. Happiness is a very different state of mind, isn't it?
Okay. Can we then move on to debating this item as to whether or not we support the application or not? Does anyone wish to debate it one way or the other? Councillor Philpott, I think, has come up again.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll go first. I'm sure there'll be other members who will want to have their say on what they've heard and what they've read, and what indeed they witnessed when visiting the site. I thought, Chairman, that Mr. Armstrong made some extremely pertinent points. The central question, however, appears before us appears to be one of, I would suggest, one of integrity. We've got a company here that is said to have behaved in a way in which it wants to, and has scant regard, it appears, for existing planning conditions. It's suggested that TJ Haulage appear to see approaches by the planning authority as an occupational hazard and a nuisance. There also seems to be a feeling locally that the company will brush off any threats by Hampshire County Council, give undertakings to comply, and then continue with their activities in a manner that suits them. I said this is a matter really, or appears to be a matter of integrity rather than anything else, but it's the integrity, Chairman, I would suggest, of the County Council that is in the dock here, every bit as much as the integrity of the company. The only document, however, I would suggest, Chairman, that we have in order to determine this application is our own Hampshire Minerals and Waste Local Plan, and the relevant policy, I believe, is policy 10. So the question we have here is we have to ask ourselves some very serious questions, I would suggest, about our ability to and our commitment to enforcement powers. Because policy 10 does not appear to give us sufficient grounds to refuse this application. So I would say that I'm going to have to say, Chairman, because with the lack of planning grounds to refuse this application, I think we're in a position where we're almost obliged and forced really to agree to it. It may go against our better judgment in some respects. But what we must do, Chairman, is I believe as a committee, as a council and the department, and I'm sure I have complete confidence in the integrity of our officers as well and professionalism of our officers, that we ensure that in this particular case, we are much more proactive in the way in which we enforce the conditions, because I fear our reputation as a county council could be damaged if we don't. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree entirely with the remarks just made by my colleague, Councillor Philpott. I did indicate, Chairman, to ask a question, and I'll sort of ask it now, because it is the reputation of the council that's at stake here and enforcement. And I wanted to ask a question on condition 31, which says include location of sensitive noise receptors plus dates and times for the undertaking of assessment work. That to me is key to it. The sensitive noise receptors will indicate when noise is at unacceptable level. Now, how are we going to assess? Key to this, I agree with what Councillor Philpott says, that we've got no real planning grounds to refuse it, but that is what has got to be enforced vigorously with this company. They clearly have no regard. They can do what they like, and we were told earlier on that this morning are you still with me? My screen.
Yeah, you're still there.
You know, they're trying to arrange a liaison panel now. With hindsight, but what will they do? They'll just perhaps listen to the residents and, you know, will they give an answer? No, they won't. They'll just carry on doing what they want to do. I think they're showing no regard at all for the residents. So with reluctance, I think I will have to support this application, but I would be urging that can I ask a question, Chairman? Reading that again, including the location of sensitive noise receptors, plus dates and times for the undertaking of assessment work. What does that mean? Who is going to be assessing that? And are we going to be really proactive with keeping some control over this company? Are we going to enforce? Thank you, Chairman.
It'll be, I suspect it'll be HCC and the Environmental Health Officer who will be assessing, but I'll let Sam answer.
That's correct. And yeah, the wording of that condition has been sort of tightened up specifically to protect those sensitive dwellings, properties and dwellings. The applicant has to comply with that condition, and they wouldn't be, in my experience, they don't have any in-house acoustic expertise, and so they would have to go to an expert. They still wouldn't be able to operate the new areas for which the equipment's required until that scheme has been approved. And as Councillor Carter said, those locations and dates and times, and including an annual noise survey, have to be, specified, agreed and put into practice before they can carry on doing some of the works that this additional plant is necessary for.
Chairman, if I can I just suggest that there should be some clarification in that condition 31. Perhaps we could have a bit more explanation. How often, and the dates and times, and who is going to be monitored? Well, how many receptors are there going to be? Clearly, they can be really important. Who's going to control them?
That's a good question. And going back to the original permission, and I think it's condition going back to condition 28, that refers to the environmental statement from 2016, which agreed the monitoring locations and sensitive premises and properties back then. So I think that would be a good starting point for any updated noise assessment, noise mitigation plan, and that's what I would expect to come in, something to be building on that, which specifically looks at existing plant machinery on site and the noise levels it generates and impact or no impact, and then adding in this additional equipment, and they do the assessment, they do the monitoring and all sorts of weather conditions, different dates and times, and all those things factored in at the different receptor locations for what receptors in this case being residential properties. So the condition is. So I'll take your point about the clarification, but the environmental health officers are happy with that condition, and from an enforcement point of view, we're satisfied that that condition is tight enough to be enforced if it needed to be.
Okay, but the integrity of enforcement is at stake here. So it just says plus dates and times. Well, that could be, what does that mean? It could just be one day a year. Well, you say an annual survey. I think from an integrity point of view, there's got to be some demonstration that this company knows that enforcement is going to be strict, and it's got to happen on a regular basis. No. Sorry, Chairman.
I think, Councillor Carter, you've made your point. Yes. I don't think the condition, I think the County Council can make that clear to the applicant, and they will do so if this is granted. Councillor House, Councillor Price, you've both got your hands up. Do you wish to debate this item, or was that left over from questions?
No, it wasn't a legacy hand, Chairman. It was a hand for the debate rather than questions. I was intrigued earlier on by Alexis McAvoy's comment about whether she was confused or not. I don't think Alexis has never knowingly been confused, and I think that actually underlines the whole debate we've had this morning. The whole discussion has been built on a very shaky house of cards with ifs and buts and maybes and wannabes and if-onlys, and that troubles me deeply. I'm certainly of the view that technically, in any normal circumstance, this could be a relatively straightforward application where the applicant had managed the site well, but had come to a rational conclusion based on a business plan that they needed more equipment to manage their operation in an efficient manner, to make a decent profit, to get off the site perhaps a little bit quicker, and cause no more inconvenience to residents along the way. But I don't feel that's the position that we're in. As Councillor Philpott was saying earlier on, it isn't a question about whether we should be rewarding bad behaviour or not. But the issue is that we shouldn't have to take planning enforcement against developers and operators of sites, because people should operate within the conditions that have been permitted, and that clearly hasn't happened here. And I have absolutely no confidence at all that if we permit this application today, that either, sadly, we actually do have the resource to properly enforce, but more importantly, I have no confidence that the operator will act in accordance with the permission. And I think it will be the residents that have to pay the consequence of that. So we are, I think, caught in a moral dilemma here. You don't often hear moral dilemmas mentioned in planning committees, but I think that's one that we somewhat unusually have this morning. And it's one where I just don't feel confident to vote this through as set out this morning. But equally, I know that simply refusing it isn't going to work, because our planning case is pretty weak. I think we have to find a middle route forward on this, and I'm taken by the comments that were made by Peter Armstrong right at the very start of this discussion, around about 10:10 this morning, that actually we need to have some solid monitoring and evidence over a period of time that this operator is actually capable of operating the planning permission they've been given with the conditions that were originally given, that were the conditions they were prepared to accept on the basis of the application they put forward to this committee, and this council therefore took a decision to approve, and see whether that works. And if we've got that, and we don't have these lackadaisical arrangements for panel meetings, where actually I almost feel it's slightly contemptuous for councillors to be receiving emails during the course of this meeting, belatedly trying to set up a panel meeting. It just underlines the whole set of problems with this operator. So I'm minded, Chairman, inconvenient as it may be, to defer this on the reasons that I've set out, because I don't think we've got the moral case to impose this development and this operator on the neighbouring residents when we're not confident the operator will fulfil their conditions, or indeed, if we're honest about it, that we as a council have got the ability to properly enforce.
Fine. Councillor Price, were you wishing to speak as well?
I am, yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris will remember probably about 9 months, a year ago maybe, is that I'd been abroad and I saw in a particular country that on the gates of where development was taking place, there was monitoring equipment which showed the actual noise which was coming out of that site. So the public could see all the time whether they were complying or whether they were not complying. And Chris said, yeah, that's a good idea, something we ought to think about. I think this is an ideal site to trial it and amend the conditions, which says there has to be on display at the front of the site what the decibel readings are from the site. And therefore, everybody can see, are they complying or are they not complying? So that's all I wanted to say is a thought for in addition to the conditions. And I would go along with what Keith has just said a moment ago of deferring this item to look at those sorts of conditions and changing conditions so they are much more stringent. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Chris, do you wish to make any observations on those two of Councillor House and Councillor Price?
Well, I think the comment, and Councillor Price and I have discussed the potential for real-time monitoring on sites. Whether that would be feasible here, I think we need to check that out with the Environmental Health Officer. I'm not aware of any sites where that's happened yet, and I'm not that sure how easy it would be to do in these circumstances. But certainly it's something we can think about going forward, and I would happily have a conversation with the Environmental Health Officer at the New Forest about the potential for that and whether they think it would be something that we could justify.
Right. I've got two other people who wish to speak, and I've got Councillor McAvoy, Councillor Cooper and Councillor Gibson all wish to speak on this item. So Councillor McAvoy, you were first up.
Right, thank you, Chairman. I was first of all mindful to refuse this application, but studying all the reasons to refuse it, the noise one is slightly tenuous, but I do like what Councillor Price has said, and just because positioning a monitor, an ongoing monitor, visible monitor, noise monitor, hasn't happened before, doesn't mean it couldn't happen now. And where there's a will, there's a way. Excuse me. Oh dear. Excuse me. I am not happy. I'm not content to accept that the applicant will comply with any of our conditions. Charming as the gentleman is, it won't turn my head to the facts of the matter, which are that residents are suffering. Maybe the applicant doesn't deliberately want to be difficult, but that's the way it's coming across. And this new 31, it's definitely nowhere near tight enough. It's a good idea in theory, but it's nowhere near tight enough. So I would like to go along with deferring this until it has been investigated as to the positioning of a receptor or receptors on the outside edges of the site, which is pretty large, because there would be a lot more houses close by if they weren't out of action at the moment due to other circumstances. So I would support deferring this. I would urge Chris to look into positioning these receptors, and I think we need to have feedback as to what is actually going on at the moment. Thanks, Chairman.
Right, Councillor Cooper. That's Rod Cooper.
I want to speak to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a number of things that I'd like to say here. Peter Armstrong made some very interesting points early on, and one of the key things that struck in my mind was the word integrity. I joined council because I wanted to represent the people of my area, and that is the prime reason that I'm a councillor. I represent the people of my area, and I think if we let this application through, we are not being representative of those people of that area. Clearly, TJ have been appalling with their regard to local residents. I think there are definitely noise issues here. There are definitely dust issues, and TJ seem to be pushing the boundaries at every available opportunity. And frankly, I, for one, am not happy with it. Now, I would support a deferral, but I definitely would not support letting this application through in its current form. We need to see a number of things happen. We need to see liaison panel up and running, and not just the applicants giving residents they need to listen, not just turn up and play and not pay a blind bit of notice. They need to listen. We need to see some decent behaviour, and as I say, in its current form, I won't be supporting this application. Thank you.
Finally, Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, sorry. I sit on 2 liaison committees, and have done over the last almost 12 years. You know, I mean, I'm a bit concerned about the crescendo of indignation against the company. I don't know the company very well, but, you know, to put a quarry 30 metres from a housing estate, I mean, that's the problem, because I mean, even in, say, the A303 Raymond Brown thing, we get complaints from residents, but the residents are like a mile away. In this particular case, the big problem is that you've put a quarry right next to local residents, and you're always going to get complaints. I mean, if I was living across the road, I'd be complaining all the time because I wouldn't want the quarry there. So we've created a massively toxic arrangement. So, you know, I mean, I think that we ought to bear that in mind. Yes, the company should behave better, but, you know, the quarry's there. We gave permission for the quarry. They're looking for permission to use slightly larger equipment. I think that it's a reasonable request. I think that we should massively engage in enforcement to ensure that all the conditions are met. But I think we must have a balanced view here, because there's never going to be a comfortable relationship between a housing estate and a quarry 30 metres away. That's all I'll say.
Thank you for that. I think that everybody has...
Chairman, I've had my hand up for about the last...
sorry, I missed you. Sorry, Mark. Yeah, off you go.
Very briefly, because most of it's been said already by our colleagues on the committee. the thing that really strikes me is that this is a quality of life issue, and the whole function of the county council in whatever it does, for whomsoever it does, is about quality of life. And it really grieves me, having been on the council for 15 years now and having been on this committee for 15 years, that we can't actually protect the environment of the nearby residents. And I think that's a really crucial issue. And I think deferral to put in place a programme so that we can actually see how we're going to enforce the conditions is probably the way forward. I mean, I'd love to refuse this. Mr. Armstrong and Councillor Wade gave a pair of the strongest deputations I've heard for many a year. But as Councillor House said earlier on, if you had come along, if the applicant had come along for the permission that they're seeking now in the first place, would we have refused it? The answer is probably not. Although I think Councillor Gibson has a point about the proximity, but that's down to the minerals plan, not down to the planning permission. So let's defer it. Let's sort out how we, the county, are going to resource the protection of the environment for the local neighbours, and then bring it back to us to have a discussion. Thank you.
Last, Councillor Quantrill, you've now put your hand up. You wish to speak on it?
Yes, please. I'm cautious about delaying this one. Remember, colleagues, we've had 10 complaints in the whole year. I won't ask Mr. Dumbrell to tell us whether there's the same people complaining. We also have the report of the Environmental Health Officer who hasn't raised concerns. And I'm minded that Mr. Armstrong is strongly supporting the officers re-engaging with the liaison committee. And the fundamental thing is the reason why we're here today is because the enforcement officers have gone into the site, have told them to cease and desist using the information, and have told them to apply, as they have done now, for permission. So if we delay now, I think we'll be on very weak grounds if it goes to appeal. Thank you.
Before I sum up, can I ask Chris, finally, and possibly Caroline, essentially what we have today? We have to look at the application, and we have an application which we either accept or refuse. If we were to defer it, Chris, what do you think can be achieved and which cannot be achieved anyway by the existing conditions? And if we defer it, how long do you think would be needed in order to get what members are seeking?
I think, Chairman, you've heard Sam explain the comments that you had from the Environmental Health Officer, and there was clearly some suggestion within those comments that a little bit more information from the applicant would have been helpful. If members, and it perhaps goes without saying, I would strongly recommend we don't go the refusal route in this case for all the reasons that we've discussed. But if members felt that a deferment was appropriate, I think it would be to receive additional noise monitoring and potentially modelling work, and to consider the use of noise conditions that might include some more continuous monitoring element to it. Something along those lines, it seems to be what a couple of members have raised. Now that might, in order for the applicant to do more work, that might take, a couple of months, 3 months, I don't know, to do some more noise monitoring and noise modelling work for the Environmental Health Officer. But I'm thinking it would be something along those lines. I don't know whether Sam has got any thoughts on that. He's a bit closer to the Environmental Health Officer's comments. Sam?
What I was going to add, going back to condition 28, the noise level conditions, which refers to the original environmental statement from the original permission. I've looked. There are 4 approved noise monitoring locations around the edge of the site. 3 of which are on the western side of the site. One to the northwest, one almost immediately opposite the site's vehicular access, and one to the southwest of the site. Now, what I would think is, again, if members were minded to approve this today, with condition 31, the way it's worded, Councillor Carter raised the issue about dates and times and locations. My feeling would be, and the Environmental Health Officer, I'm sure, would support this, would be that these existing monitoring points are included within that condition 31 and even added to, or added to in terms of locations or amount or number of sampling occurrences. So that would be my way of going forward with this, and perhaps condition 31. I think condition 31 is worded tightly enough yet flexibly enough to allow us, with the environmental health officers, to add to ensure the applicant's noise expert does address some of the councillors and local residents' concerns in this regard.
Sam, if I may, and again, sorry, Chairman, but if members were ultimately minded to grant permission with that condition 31, could we not just put in there that it includes a location of sensitive noise receptors plus dates and times for the undertaking assessment works, including an annual noise survey, as agreed in writing by the local planning authority, or by the planning authority?
That's what I was going to suggest.
So so if you were going that route, Chairman, I would suggest we just put some extra words in that condition. Thank you.
Right. Well, then, if we amend that condition, I don't know whether or not that will satisfy those of you who have asked for a deferral. It may not be so, but I don't. So I think what we will now do is go for a vote on this, which is what we've been asked to do. Either we support it with that amended 31 condition and rely on enforcement of that condition, or we refuse it. This has been a contentious item. Councillor House, I think you want to come in on it before.
Yes, Chairman, just to give notice of a motion to defer if refusal is the outcome of this first vote.
Right. Then you're going to give notice of motion to defer. If you like, we can discuss. Is that seconded? Councillor McAvoy is.
I was going to second, never mind. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Councillor McAvoy is waving to you. Yes.
Yes, I can see it. So you're seconding it. Keith, I think what we will do, as you have put an amendment, we will deal with the amendment before we go to the.
I think that's right, Chairman. That would be the conventional way of doing it. I wasn't trying to undermine your authority by suggesting it.
Do you wish to discuss further the question?
Personally, I don't. I think we've discussed it enough. I think we know what the issues are.
Yeah, right. Well, let's then take a vote, which has been seconded, that we defer this item.
Sorry, Chairman. There is an amendment there from Councillor House. I think it's a very reasonable one, which introduces effectively a new material. And would it not be fair to have the opportunity just briefly to discuss that before we move to a vote on it?
If you wish to, I think Councillor House had suggested we'd already discussed the amendment, but feel free to come in.
Thank you, Chairman. I only have a couple of sentences, really. I mean, I really will be brief. But this is a planning committee, Chairman, as far as I can see, and we need to be precise in what we decide. And if we are faced with a planning application, the normal course of events is to refuse it or to accept it. It's really that's what we have to determine and have to decide. If we're going to do something else, such as deferral, we can usually defer for things like site visits or whatever. But and so deferral is a perfectly legitimate tool. But if we are going to defer, Chairman, I think we need to apply that same level of precision to any determination to defer. So I want to know really what it is that I'm actually going to see next time around, which I haven't seen this time around. That's only the question. Thank you.
Councillor House, could you say specifically what your amendment deferral is?
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. And I think Councillor Vogt was absolutely right to say we need to be precise. We should be precise because it's not fair on our staff, quite apart from anything else, not to be precise. I think the debate threw up several points where I think we could potentially, at some point in the future, I don't want to define how long the future is. That will be for staff to come back to us with. Get to a point where we have reassurance. The first is we actually want to see monitoring on site now to make sure the existing application, the existing permission is capable of being delivered. And secondly, we want some further feedback on whether some enhanced monitoring arrangements could be put in place, more or less along the lines that Councillor Price suggested. Now, it may well be those two are complementary, maybe they're not, but in either case, I think we need to have some more thought given to this over the course of a period of time to work those issues through. So my motion to defer is on that basis.
So the wording of the deferral is?
Chairman, do you want me to just assist with that?
Yeah.
If it was for to allow for the submission of additional noise monitoring and modelling information and the exploration of the potential for additional noise conditions, including consideration of real-time monitoring. Something like that.
Is that it, Keith?
That sounds pretty close to what I said, doesn't it? So Chris Murray, as always, gets it spot on. Right.
So, do you wish to say anything more, Councillor Philpott, about the amendment?
Actually, no, Chairman. I think that was very helpful from both Councillor House and from Chris Murray. I'm now satisfied. Thank you.
Okay.
We always try to be helpful.
So we will now go for a vote on the amendment, which is for a deferral for the reasons as set out by Chris Murray, based on what Councillor House has said. Because it has been a contentious issue, I suggest that we go for a vote individually. That's gone.
Chairman, whilst you're waiting for your answering machine message to sort itself out, can I ask, is there a deferral? Is there a time limit to this deferral?
In due course on that.
Yeah, Chris, regarding the time frame, would you be happy to leave it as just a future regulatory committee meeting, just so we can kind of gauge how long will be needed?
I think we will have to. Yeah, it's. I would hope it wouldn't take an awful lot of additional time. But if we, for example, if we want to do some, I want the applicant to do some more monitoring of the noise currently at the site, just to give us some more up-to-date information, then that might be 2 or 3 months. So a future meeting of the regulatory committee, I think, is what all we need to say.
Sorry, Chairman, I muted you, so you'll need to unmute. So.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's gone. Can we therefore take a vote, an individual vote, and if you would go through each member so that they can say whether they support or against the amendment?
Thank you. So I'll go through members alphabetically for the deferral. So if you could just confirm for, abstain or against. So Councillor Carter. Oh, it's Councillor Carter still. Councillor Carter, could you unmute and confirm whether you vote for, against or wish to abstain from the deferral?
Sorry, Chairman, I'm unmuted now. Abstain.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, abstain.
Abstain, thank you. Councillor Mark Cooper.
For.
Councillor Rod Cooper.
For.
Councillor Frankham. Or you're muted.
Sorry,
Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Gibson.
To be honest with you, I'll abstain because I would have voted for it going ahead, and the deferral would have been quite acceptable afterwards. I don't know really what to do here, so I'll just abstain.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hare. Oh, you're muted, Councillor Hare.
For.
Thank you. Councillor House.
For.
Councillor Hughes.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Irish.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Latham.
Against.
Councillor McAvoy.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Penman.
He may have left the meeting because I know he had a hospital appointment at about 12
Okay,
o'clock.
that's fine. Thank you. Councillor Philpott.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Price.
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Quantrill.
Against.
Thank you. So that is 9 in favour. So that's the majority, Chairman. So the deferral was carried.
Right, so that concludes that item for the time being, and so we'll see it again in due course. I think we'll have a 5-minute break now before we move on to item number 7. So back in 5 minutes if you don't mind.
Thank you, colleagues. to start the webcast again. I will confirm
yeah,
once it's
sorry,
started.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Okay.
The webcast has started. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. I'm assuming we are all here again. So we're now moving on to agenda item 7, which is 3 applications, all linked in relation to an application for a quarry at Hamer Warren Quarry, 600,000 tonnes of sand gravel to come out of Bleak Hill Phase 3, and with conditions relating to, this has all got to be done by the 31st of December 2025, and in the meantime the existing aggregate recycling site will continue to be there, subject to amendments to the Section 106 agreement as set out on the additional paper. So I think Dave Smith, David, you're going to introduce this item.
I will. Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. I just share my presentation with you. Put it on to. There we go. I hope you can all see that. I hope you can all see it now.
Not yet, Dave.
Not yet.
No?
No.
Did you do it via the share content button at the top, Dave, next to the microphone symbol?
We got that now?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
That was a good start.
Dave. Can you put it on slideshow, Dave? Thank you.
Yep. There we go. As Chairman mentioned, this is 3 applications at the what's called the Hamer Warren Quarry, but is the Bleak Hill phases of the existing quarry. The principal one is an extension into Bleak Hill 3, which is an allocated site in the Hampshire Minerals and Waste Local Plan. The 2 other applications are variations of the existing site to allow the retention of the existing site access infrastructure, the processing plant, and also the aggregate recycling plant, which is used to generate the materials for the restoration of the site. All 3 applications are being considered under this report. There has been an update report, so just a couple of minor issues which I will raise when we come to them. And the proposal has been taken to committee as it's a major mineral development with an environmental impact assessment and environmental statement. So if we move on to the location, this is the first point in the update report. The report mentions that the site is to the north of Alderholt and to the south of Ringwood. As plainly you can see, it is southeast of Alderholt and north of Ringwood, and a couple of kilometres rather south-southwest of Fordingbridge. The Avon River runs north-south to the east of the site. We have footpath 25 runs to the south of Bleak Hill 1 along this boundary. Path 23 runs between Bleak Hills 1 and 2 along this boundary. And then we have a footpath 43 along the north-west boundary of Bleak Hill 3. Harbridge Drove, the main access, runs around the eastern side of the site and then down towards Verwood Road at the bottom. The proposal is to extend the site into Bleak Hill 3, which is this triangular area at the top. It's currently in pasture. It's grade 3 agriculture, grade 3B agricultural land. It's proposed to use the existing access of Harbridge Drove at the south here. There is a Section 106 legal agreement requiring all vehicles arriving and leaving the site to do so via the south, so nothing can turn north up Harbridge Drove. Then we have the 300 metres or so of access road, which crosses footpath 25 at this point before entering Bleak Hill 1. Bleak Hill 1 is the current processing and stocking area for the gravel, and also is where the inert aggregate recycling facility is sited. The eastern half of the site has already been restored and is in aftercare. Then the main haul road runs up the centre of the site, crossing footpath 23 at this point for entering Bleak Hill 2. All extraction has now ceased in Bleak Hill 2, that would be on the eastern boundary. The western half is being restored. The eastern middle portion is currently being infilled, and that will continue up until, well, the existing provision is up until 2022. The haul road runs up the centre of the site and is proposed to enter Bleak Hill 3 on the southern boundary. Bleak Hill 3 itself is proposed to be worked in 6 phases, started in this southwest corner and working clockwise. The soils will be stripped from the early phases of Bleak Hill 3 and used to form the screening bunds along footpath 43 and then along the boundary with Harbridge Road to provide the visual and noise attenuation as you would expect on all sites. The site, as has already been mentioned, is proposed to complete operations by the 31st of December 2025 and is to be restored to grassland, woodland, nature conservation with some public access to the site. You'll be able to see the restoration proposals in the Appendix G. Next place is just a basic phasing plan, so you can see how it would work. Starts in the southwest corner and works around clockwise. And then we have the aerial photograph, which again is fairly old, because obviously now the Bleak Hill 2 has now been worked. In terms of the photos, the first ones we have are showing the access off of Harbridge Road. As has been said, there's already a legal agreement stating that all vehicles have to approach and leave via the south. Now, I do have a couple of short videos here, which fingers crossed will work and will give you an idea of the Bleak Hill 3 proposed area and also a couple of the existing sites. So this is Bleak Hill 3 looking north from the northern boundary of Bleak Hill 2. And it's moving from east to west, as you will see. It's currently just grassland, let's say grade 3B agricultural land, and will start in that bottom southwest corner and work round clockwise. The next one shows Bleak Hill 2 from the same point, but now looking south over Bleak Hill 2. So looking from west to east, starting with the restoration areas. And we have the haul road, which will be extended into Bleak Hill 3, assuming permission is granted. Then across the infill areas with the last extraction phases in the far distance on the eastern boundary there. The next one shows Bleak Hill 1, which is the processing and stocking area. So you can see the stockpiles, the recycling plant, the haul road again coming up the middle, and coming round to further stockpiles with again the restored and aftercare land on the far eastern boundary. Now, some of the issues raised or concerns raised were to do with the haul road crossing points. So here we have a photograph of the haul road crossing footpath 23 on the left hand side, and then footpath 23 approaching the haul road on the right hand side, to show you what already is in existence and what has been approved by rights of way and highways in terms of signage. Then the last photo shows the haul road crossing of footpath 25, which is the one to the south of Bleak Hill 1, the processing and stocking area. In terms of consultations and representations, the majority of consultees have no objections, subject to there being suitable conditions imposed and also obligations either readdressed or included in the Section 106 legal agreements. There has been one objection from the Ellingham, Harbridge and Italy Parish Council. They objected on the grounds of impact on the highway and to do with the right to way. There have also been 14 representations from the public. 9 object to the proposal, but 5 made suggestions for improvements to the proposals as they stood. The key issues when considering this application, firstly, that it is allocated for mineral extraction in Policy 20 of the Minerals Waste Plan, so subject to meeting the identified development considerations for the site would be supported. In terms of the consultees, and obviously these 3 issues are also the 3 of the issues identified as development considerations in the plan. We have highways, the impact on local amenity, and the nature conservation and long-term management proposals. The highways have been consulted. They are satisfied that there is no strong impact or increased impact on the highway, subject to the usual conditions and also subject to a obligation in Section 106 agreement about a financial contribution for highway maintenance. In terms of the impact of local amenity, environmental health, again, have been consulted. They have seen the environmental statement and the subsequent information provided, and they are satisfied that the information provided does address their concerns, and subject again to the usual conditions in terms of noise and dust management schemes, do not raise any objection. And the last goes also for nature conservation. It's a major concern and a consideration of the application. Ecology have been fully considered all of the information provided, and again subject to the conditions and the legal agreement covering management and aftercare, they raise no objection. So it should be pointed out that these 3 issues would also meet the development considerations as set out in the plan for allocated sites. In terms of the public representations, these also raise issues about the impact on the groundwater, the impact on footpath crossings, the lack of local liaison panel, and the hours of operation. Now, in terms of the groundwater, the Environment Agency have been consulted. Again, they've concluded their overall the effects on water resources is not significant. However, conditions and legal agreement obligations on monitoring and mitigation measures are proposed. In terms of the footpath crossing and the local liaison panel, they are sort of tied together in that obviously the concerns of the parish and the representations have been noted, and consequently the applicant has proposed a new environmental management scheme covering the rights of way and also plant and vehicle operating protocol with a new suggested complaints procedure. They've also committed to regular local liaison meetings to actually address any issues as and when they arise. These will be covered by conditions and also be included as an informative in any decision. In terms of the hours of operation, it had initially been proposed to continue the existing working hours, which would have been 7 till 6 Mondays to Friday and 7 till 1 on Saturdays. However, a concern was raised about 7 o'clock starts 6 days a week. So following EHO comments and the public representations, the applicant has proposed to change the 7 o'clock start as usual Monday to Friday, but an 8 o'clock start on Saturdays. And obviously that also includes no working on Sundays or bank holidays as normal. And the condition of the has been amended to reflect this. In terms of the recommendations, and recommendation 1 is the second point, which has been included in the update report. It's recommended that permission be granted subject to a new Section 106 legal agreement providing obligations on lorry routing groundwater monitoring, management and aftercare, and final contributions for highway maintenance, and the conditions listed in Appendix A. Recommendation 2 refers to the application at Bleak Hill 2, and that's recommended that permission be granted subject to a deed of variation to transfer the existing Section 106 legal obligations and the conditions listed in Appendix B. And application 3, which covers the aggregate recycling facility, is recommended that the planning permission be granted subject to the conditions in Appendix C. And that ends the presentation.
Thank you for that. We now go to deputations.
Chairman, could I possibly just make a comment?
Yeah. Yeah.
I did drop out of the meeting when we got to the video part. I disconnected myself, but I've heard the latter part of the presentation, and of course I haven't missed any of the debate. Can I stay or shall I go?
I think it's best if you don't vote on this one.
Okay.
I think that those are the rules, and much as I hear what you say, but I think it's better if you don't vote. You can of course stay, but voting, the rules are that you have to be present at for the whole time.
I was here, but I disappeared. So okay, I just thought I ought to mention that. So thank you.
Right. Okay, so we move on to the first deputation, which is of Councillor Lindsay Burtonshaw, Chairman of Ellingham, Harbridge and Ibsley Parish Council. You have 10 minutes.
Can you now hear me, members?
I can hear you, yes.
Thank you. Well, I hope I have sufficient time to address the concerns of not only the parish council but local residents with this. In essence, the parish council are supportive of an ongoing mineral site at Hamer, but we have continually raised two matters of concern. They're quite simple, they're straightforward, and they can be dealt with in conditioning. But in our view, the applicant has not addressed these concerns adequately. These are the two concerns: inadequate gated facilities at the crossing point of footpath 23A, giving rise to huge safety concerns for walkers and riders. A photograph was shown by David Smith, which illustrated that. I'll come on to it in a moment. The other issue is the deterioration and unsuitability of the adjacent road network, Harbridge Drove. We're not suggesting it shouldn't be used or that the application shouldn't go forward, but there can be improvements made. And we pointed out in our letter of objection in July that the applicant has been given ample time via the preparation of an extremely extensive environmental statement and Regulation 25 to address those concerns, but in our opinion has failed to do so. Dealing with number one, this public access point over the footpath. The retention of the crossing points is considered, this is in your report, to be of slight adversity to users of the network, and overall this impact is temporary. We disagree. If you can visualize, back in 2009, a design was approved to put very large agricultural gates with the heavy metal closing mechanism. You all are familiar with that. These are what the members of the public and those on horses and cyclists have to open, push back, and then close behind them. And a colleague of mine did have a fractured finger because they are so heavy and cumbersome. They refer to signage being a condition of the existing position as being adequate. Anyway, more recently, improvements have been carried out by the applicant to replace the heavy metal closing mechanism with, this is superb, a piece of bungee rope. In our view, that is still inadequate and inappropriate. Who has the right of way here? In the early days, the gates were permanently open to footpath users and only closed by the quarry operators when they required access. Understandably, that is not now practical. Anyway, I ploughed through the environmental statement for a solution, and I'm directed to the environmental management plan, find under 1 paragraph 5.2 a mitigation measure of a concrete surface to a width of 6 metres. This is to stop the mud and debris for walkers. And also signage to warn users of the crossing point. What happens when the water runs off the concrete pad into the footpath? We are left with deep ruts and mud. However, we're also promised a daily inspection, a daily log, a complaints procedure and a liaison panel to notify of any issues. I'll refer to that in a minute. So there are actually no suggestions on an improved gated access. Surely, 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 it is not beyond the wit of a highly professional and efficient gravel company to come up with a sensible, safe, efficient, manageable, robust, sustainable and operable scheme to alert users of the footpath that lorries are about to cross. We do ask that this can be conditioned accordingly. So moving on to our concern about Harbridge Drove. Yes, the Traffic and Highways Assessment has concluded that the long-term operational effects on the transport network will be negligible. Our view is that is not the case. The officer's report on page 154 to 162 deals with highway issues and acknowledges this is a primary concern of local representations. Have you all looked at the letters of objection? They all refer to the state and condition of Harbridge Drove. As I've said before, we are not looking to close it as an access to the quarry, but we want improvements made. It is not a suitable road in its present condition for lorries to pass without creating deep ruts in the side verges and thereby putting other car and vehicle users at risk. I will point out that in recent weeks, I was delighted to see Highways Authority have put up notices to close the road on 3 occasions. One occasion they put some gravel in the verges at the side, which needless to say were pushed out by lorry wheels within 3 days. The other 2 occasions they closed the road, hooray, to do more improvements. They never turned up. Under the original permissions in 2003, there was a financial contribution of £1,000 per year, up to a maximum of £11,000 for improvements to the Drove. We would like to know how that money has been spent and what are the detailed proposals under the proposed Section 106 agreement for that financial contribution in the future, and how it is to be spent. I'm going to move on to the liaison panel. We already have one, and rather like the previous application, it is not controlled by Hampshire, it is controlled by the applicant. And that is the reason we haven't had a meeting for 3 years. So please don't promise another one, but make it an obligation, a condition of the permission, that those liaison panel meetings are held twice a year, and can the control please pass back to the county? In the executive summary, you acknowledge that the key issues relate to the impact on highway and local amenity. Yes, you're right, but have they been addressed adequately? the majority, in summary almost, the majority of conditions at the moment give a reason in the interests of local amenity. Is this really true? What about an increased awareness in the interests of the local community? And to summarise, with the footpath, I want to see specific conditions about the improved gated access and the point about the liaison panel being put in words of a few syllables that they will be held twice a year. So that with these very firm conditions, again, like the previous application, it avoids the applicant really leading to bad behaviour and ignoring things. And we've got something to enforce against if they don't come up with the answers. With the road scheme, we want a positive and detailed highway improvement scheme with surfacing as appropriate, dealing with the verges and the slowing of traffic, possibly with a speed limit. We want to know what money is agreed and how this will be allocated. And the parish council would even contribute towards such a scheme if it is feasible and sensible to do so. We don't want loose conditioning, we want specific conditioning. And I think until those are in place, I would ask members to consider deferring their decision until the officers can come back with an agreed set of clear conditions on those two aspects. Thank you, members, for your time.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, do you have any questions of the councillor in relation to her deputation? Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Burnshaw. You made a statement, it's not beyond the wit of experts and engineers to come up with an acceptable crossing. Can you help us? What do you believe constitutes an acceptable crossing?
Thank you, Councillor. Possibly, I'm not a technician in this respect, but possibly a traffic light, possibly a gate mechanism which is operable, you know, to open and close, an automated gate mechanism. I think we've been told that it's far too expensive for the gravel company to consider. But I would certainly give that further thought and take some more technical advice on it.
Right. Does anyone else have any questions of Councillor Burtonshaw? Would appear not, so we will then move on to Helen Hudson, who is making a deputation on behalf of the applicant. Helen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I'm Helen Hudson, the planning consultant, acting on behalf of Cemex UK Operations Limited. As David Smith described, the 3 applications before you today relate to the extraction of sand and gravel from an extension site, Bleak Hill 3, at Hamer Warren Quarry, which is currently made up of Bleak Hill 1 and 2. The proposed sand and gravel extension site is a 10.7 hectare area immediately to the north of the existing Hamer Warren Quarry. The extension site is allocated in the adopted Hampshire Minerals and Waste Local Plan. The proposed development is to extract some 600,000 tonnes of sand and gravel and includes works to create an extended haul road and to backfill the site with inert material and to progressively restore the land to agriculture with increased biodiversity enhancements and public access. Hamer Warren Quarry has been operational since the 1960s, and the most recent variation permissions in 2019 extended the life of Bleak Hill 1 and 2 up until the 31st of December 2022 to enable sand extraction works to finish and restoration to be completed. If Bleak Hill 3 is permitted, the lifetime of the active site would need to be extended until the 31st of December 2025, a 3-year additional period over that currently permitted. The extension site will be worked in phases using an excavator to a depth of some 5 metres and will be a continuation of current working operations. The site will be screened and bunded with 3 to 5 metre high bunds to mitigate visual impact, noise and dust. The extracted mineral will be taken back by dumper truck along the haul road to Bleak Hill 1 for processing, washing and grading. The existing access, processing plant and ancillary operational areas in Bleak Hill 1 and 2 will be needed to be retained, which means that restoration in these areas will be delayed until Bleak Hill 3 has been worked out and restored. Sand and gravel operations are temporary, but I understand the local community around the quarry this may not be seen as the case. The sands and gravels in Bleak Hill 3 is an identified reserve and is needed to meet the production demand for aggregate, helping to meet future housing and infrastructure needs in the county. If Bleak Hill 3 is permitted, it will see a continuation of sand and gravel production from Hamer Warren Quarry of some 150 to 200,000 tonnes per annum for some 3 to 4 years. This will help maintain Hampshire's mineral land bank and annual aggregate production rate, and maintain a steady supply of construction materials. As Dave said, the 3 planning applications have been submitted and supported by an overarching environmental impact assessment, assessing the impact of Bleak Hill 3 and also the cumulative impacts of retaining Bleak Hill 1 and 2 and their activities. The EIA concludes that with mitigation measures in place, there will not be any significant adverse impacts on the environment or surrounding community. These mitigation measures are embedded into the extraction and restoration operations and management. Planning conditions and a Section 106 agreement can secure these mitigation measures if planning permission is granted. A comprehensive environmental management plan has also been, which will supersede the current environmental management scheme. The environmental management plan sets out how CEMEX will address on-site management of noise, dust, air quality and lighting to protect the local community. It sets out how the access, highways and rights of way will be monitored and managed, and includes a plant and operational protocol. It includes a daily record log, and these measures set out how community complaints will be dealt with. It has a community complaints procedure included. Also, in order to address community concerns, CEMEX proposes to re-establish the quarry liaison group. We understand there have been problems in that not being run in recent years, but we will take the lead here and we will get the liaison group back up and running and operate it in accordance with Hampshire's County Council's liaison group protocol. We also understand that traffic and highways is a concern with mineral extraction. As already stated, the proposal will be a continuation of existing operations. The sand and gravel will be exported at the same rate as existing, and fill will continue at the same rate as existing. There will be no change in existing movements. And as already stated, there is an existing routing agreement in place. All HGVs approach and leave the site along Harbridge Road from the south towards Ringwood. And if permitted, the new Section 106 agreement will ensure this routing applies to Bleak Hill 3. CEMEX use Euro 6 compliant HGVs to ensure that emissions meet current air quality standards. It is recognised that as part of the consultation there is local concern about traffic along the Harbridge Road. And while CEMEX are not the only generators of traffic along this road, it is acknowledged that in the past CEMEX paid money for highway maintenance through the Section 106 agreement. It's been agreed that if the extension is permitted, CEMEX will pay Hampshire County Council a calculated sum of money to contribute to the local highway. This will be secured through the Section 106 agreement. And we hear what Harbridge and Ellingham Parish have said about the rights of way. There are 3 rights of way, 2 which cross the quarry and 1 which runs alongside the extension site of Bleak Hill 3. We have done what the current conditions require us to do. There is a gated crossing point across right of way 3, and there's signage in place as was shown on David's slides in accordance with the existing consent. Recently, we've installed low-level lighting so that the signage can be read by the users of the rights of way and by our drivers. And also we have resurfaced the right of way 23 either side of the Hall Road to assist with drainage and surfacing. And also we heard about the fact that the gate was difficult for users to lift, so we put the safety clip in place to aid with the opening of this gate. We have to balance the safety of the users crossing the quarry and also an access, so we've put the safety clip in place to ensure that the gate is shut so people don't just step out in front of the Hall Road, but also made it easier for users to open. This crossing period has received ongoing interest despite the additional measures put in place. We've got the environmental management plan with logs and a complaint procedure, but we recognise that if we reinstate the local liaison group, we can discuss these issues and improve dialogue with the local community. We think this will help. In terms of ecological conservation and management, the proposal includes embedded ecological mitigation measures as part of the restoration scheme to enhance the biodiversity and habitats of the site. The proposal includes an ecological management plan which sets out mitigation management strategies for existing on-site species such as dormouse, amphibians, reptiles, bats and nesting birds, in order to ensure they are safeguarded and properly managed. The ecological management plan also addresses how existing hedgerows on site will be safeguarded and enhanced and, where necessary, reinstated once works are completed. In terms of restoration, parts of Hamer have already been restored, but the proposed restoration scheme seeks to create additional priority habitats important to nature conservation, including conservation and replacement with over 2,000 metres of hedgerows to be managed or replanted. Overall, restoration will create 16.43 hectares of new habitat, including ponds, lowland mixed woodland, wet woodland, lowland meadow or acid grassland and reed bed. Additionally, 26.5 hectares of the restored site will comprise of agricultural grazing land. And also, within the Bleak Hill 3 extension site itself, there is a proposed net gain of 3.59 hectares of UK-backed priority habitat area. In terms of aftercare management, restored agricultural land will be subject to a 5-year aftercare scheme, and the biodiversity land a 10-year aftercare scheme and management. And this detailed management scheme can be written into the Section 106 agreement. In conclusion, this application is for a temporary period when allocated mineral extension site to maintain sand and gravel production in Hampshire for an identified need to supply construction materials. The proposal has embedded mitigation measures to protect the environment and the community, which will be delivered by CEMEX, but can also be secured by condition and Section 106 agreement. The development will result in the site being restored to a high quality restoration scheme. Thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you for that clear exposition, and thank you in particular for dealing with the concerns of the councillor, particularly with regard to the 106 agreement, the gates and the liaison panel for the future. So thank you for that. Members, do you have any questions which you wish to raise of Helen Hudson in relation to what she has just said? Councillor Philpott.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Mrs. Hudson, I listened to your presentation, and I also listened to Councillor Burtonshaw. Councillor Burtonshaw, if I recall, said that there hadn't been a liaison meeting for 3 years. Are you able to tell us why that is?
So there hasn't been a liaison meeting since I've been involved with Hamer Warren Quarry. I think that's correct to say. I think that's been an issue between CEMEX and Hampshire in getting the addresses or contacts so that we can run the liaison panel in the future. But I think now using the Hampshire protocol, we will be able to kind of run the liaison panel ourselves, and that should overcome those issues.
Councillor Philpott, that's the answer. I think it's always been the responsibility of the company to deal with liaison panels, and it's not the responsibility of Hampshire County Council, but that's the answer that's been given. And we can only hope for the future it is re-established and does and continues to be regularly meet. Any other questions of Helen Hudson? Councillor Quantrill, and then Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Mrs. Hudson, we've heard that there's a complaints log. I wonder whether you can tell us how many complaints have been logged for the rutting caused by the runoff from the footpath crossing point.
So this is a new complaints log that we're going to put into the environmental management scheme. So are you having trouble hearing me?
I didn't hear that so clearly.
So this is a new complaints log that we will now include in our environmental management scheme as part of this Bleak Hill 3 application.
Chairman, could I ask the question in a different way then?
Yeah.
How many complaints have you had in whatever context regarding the rutting of the footpath crossing point and the runoff thereof?
I can't give you a number today, sorry, I'm not the quarry manager of the site. I understand that there has been concern, an ongoing concern about the rights of way. We have sought to improve the right of way either side of the crossing point.
That's as far as we can probably take that one. Councillor Cooper, Rod Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following on from Councillor Philpott, apologies for my dog having a little session in the background there. I'm concerned that there hasn't been liaison meetings, and to be perfectly honest, I hope that this is not just because you've come to this meeting today that you've decided to reinstate them, but they stay on a more regular basis. And may I also suggest that one of the first items that you need to be discussing at the liaison meeting is this crossing and the gate issue. Can I ask for your commitment that that is so?
Certainly. We've run successful liaison quarries, liaison groups, other quarries in the southeast. I don't know why this hasn't happened. As I say, I understand from what I've been told it's because we haven't had access to the addresses, but if we can run it now, I can give a commitment that we will have a liaison meeting before we start at Bleak Hill 3 if it is permitted today, or if it's not permitted we can still re-establish the liaison meeting to discuss the crossing point, yes, and any other concerns, Harwich Drove as well.
Okay. Right. Any other questions of Helen Hudson? Does anyone then have any questions of David Smith, the officer? Can I ask David, the councillor raised the issue of the 106 and how much has been spent in the past with regard to maintenance of the road. I'm not so much concerned about the past, I'm more concerned about the future and what is in the 106, which would help her in understanding how the money is going to be used in the future.
Thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately, I'm not able to say how the money has been spent in the past, because that would have been what the highways had, so that they would have spent it as they deemed appropriate. Yeah. The proposal now is that instead of getting a yearly sum, we aggregate it into one lump sum, so that highways are able to do some full repairs and maintenance to the length of Harwich Drove, rather than just some patching up on a yearly basis as and when there is a pothole or the verge has been damaged. So that's what we are proposing at the moment. Obviously, we are in discussions with Highways, they're in discussions with their engineers to actually work out the sort of costs that would be needed to do that under current costings. Previously, it had been £1,000 a year. I suspect that there is a formula by which they can increase that to take account of inflation and things like that. So I assume they will be looking at that sort of thing to get their base figure for the life of the site, and obviously that will then be negotiated with CEMEX if and when the application is granted and before the section 106 is actually signed.
Okay, I suspect the councillor might have wanted to know how much, and we can't give that figure at the moment in reality. But it's an ongoing thing with Highways in order that the road can be improved rather than just patched up is the answer. But timing, we shall have to wait and see. Any other questions then of David Smith by any of the members? If not, we will then go into debate whether we support or wish to do anything else, oppose the application. If members do not wish to debate this item, we will then therefore go to the recommendations. There are 3 recommendations, and I can bring them up. Recommendation 1 is recommended that planning permission be granted for planning application 19/11326, subject to a new section 106 legal agreement, providing obligations on lorry routing, groundwater monitoring, management and aftercare, and financial contributions for highway maintenance and the conditions listed in Appendix A. Katie, do you wish to take that forward? I think we can probably go on this one with asking members if anyone wishes to abstain, oppose or in favour.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So members, just a reminder that if you, as with Councillor McAvoy, if you haven't been around for the full item, then to abstain from the votes. So for the first recommendation, do any members wish to abstain? Right, so it's just one for Councillor McAvoy. Do any members wish to vote against the recommendation? No. Okay, so could I get a general verbal approval from members that are in favour of that recommendation?
4.
Agreed.
Agreed.
4.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
That's carried, Chairman.
Right. So we then move on to the second recommendation that planning permission be granted, subject to a deed of variation, to transfer the 106 obligations, and the conditions are set out in Appendix B. We have how many? All right, you carry on, Kate.
Oh no, that's okay. Do any members wish to abstain on this recommendation?
No.
Okay. Any wish to vote against? No. Okay. So majority in favour of that recommendation.
And the last one is to planning permission be granted for application 19/11324. Subject to conditions as listed in Appendix C, I believe. Same thing, Katie.
Thank you. And any abstentions for this recommendation? Any wish to vote against? Okay, so that's majority in favour of that recommendation. Thank you. Those 3 are carried, Chairman.
Thank you, Katie. That, I think, therefore concludes that item. It therefore concludes the meeting. So can the webcast now be closed?